Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. It took me a minute to remember what day of the week it is. Thank you for joining us for the campus conversation, Understanding the Budget Process, with our Vice Chancellor of Budget and All Things, Neil Vickers. So with that, Neil, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Hello. All right. So lots of elements, lots of topics in budget. We could spend hours on any of them, which we're not going to do today. But I say that it's an overview. We won't have time to get into all of the details, but I think we'll take this as feedback for things where we can either send follow-up communications or even schedule one of these that's for specific topics. So, but I just want to know up front that at some point I might have to kind of curb us a little bit just for the sake of time on any particular topic. So I'm just going to jump in. I've got a few slides just to kind of get the ball rolling, and then I'm absolutely going to leave lots of time for Q&A because actually that's the way I prefer it. So with that said, what drives our budget at ACC? At some point, there's lots of questions and concerns about how budget decisions get made. So how, at least in theory, is it supposed to work? So the college, actually, we have a strategic plan. In fact, just Monday night, our afternoon, our board adopted our new 5-year strategic plan. Of course, we heard a lot about this at the Data Summit. This is all being driven by the theory of change and the new values that Russell has brought to us. And so you have this really high-level strategic plan. Doesn't get into kind of operational detail. It's really laying out these high-level goals and targets. Of course, what we got out of that was this North Star goal of 70 by 30, so 70% completion by 2030. But there was nothing in there that said how we're actually going to go do that, right? So very high level. We also have facilities master plans, and the reason I carved this one out separately, even though it doesn't get into operations, is because facilities planning is very long-term. We do facilities planning in decades. As you, I'm sure, are very aware, it actually takes years to basically make any modifications to facilities, which means it really is dependent on very long-term planning. So we have strategic plan, 5 years, long-term plan, decades. But then what we have is we get more into the operating budget, we have board policies. And your board policies, and especially here at ACC, really are what create the framework for our operating budget. So we really think about what's driving the bulk of our annual budget. Strategic plan is feeding into part of it, but also these board policies are framing up a lot of our operating budget. We have a budget policy. We have tuition and fees, property taxes, compensation, capital outlay, cash reserves, and facility standards. All of these things lay out different types of values, expectations, and in some cases even have kind of actual calculations in them that are telling us, how much money to allocate for a particular thing within our budget. So when the administration presents a budget to the board, there's always a statement in there, and there's actually a section that specifically calls out all of the policy items to basically say we're presenting a budget that is compliant with board policy. The more that you want to know and understand how the budget works, the more familiar you need to actually get with these policies. We're going to hit on the highest level of some of them, but again, I'll kind of leave it to you as to whether you want to dive in at some point to the details of these. So I'll just start off. How much money do we have and where does it come from? It's real simple. Community colleges in Texas are pretty much all the same in terms of where the money comes from. The percentages you'll see on here are different for each of us, but we have 3 main sources of revenue in Texas community colleges. We have tuition and fees, of course. We have state appropriations, and we have property taxes. At ACC, you'll see that the property tax number it's 68%. It'll be over 70% in FY25. So it is by far now our largest revenue stream. These are local property taxes paid by property owners. If you went to another community college, especially those that maybe aren't in a large city, This number will be significantly smaller, this percentage, because they won't have the robust tax base, that we have here in Austin. In fact, you'll see at some community colleges, this number may be less than 30% of their budget. What that means is they're much more reliant on tuition and fees. They'll tend to have higher tuition and fee rates than we do, and they're more reliant on their state appropriations. But at ACC, tuition and fees now are down to only about 14% of our budget. I know here in a little bit, we're probably going to talk about how does free tuition work. This is actually a big component of it, the fact that this number has gotten this small. And then state appropriations is also right there at about 14%. That state appropriations number, actually I'll get to that in a second about state appropriation. Just real quick on property taxes. I don't know if everybody in here knows how property taxes work. I know a lot of you do. It works the same way for ACC as it does for cities, counties, and school districts. We have the same tax rate structures. We have to go through the same processes with our voters to get bonds approved. It's basically the same process. Now, our tax rate tends to be a lot lower. It's usually running lately at right at or under 10 cents per $100 valuation compared to, let's say, the ISD, which will tend to be over $1 per $100 valuation. But the mechanics of how it works are exactly the same for ACC as it is for other taxing jurisdictions. Property taxes for us, hey, we're in Austin. We all know Austin's economy has been really booming for decades, to be honest. There's always a little, dips here and there, but it's really been almost a straight line upwards since the early 90s here in Austin. ACC is financially has been a huge benefactor of that, right? Just about everything that you know about ACC today in terms of its infrastructure, its salaries, the number of staff we have, the service we provide, our low tuition rate, almost all of those you'll be able to circle back to basically benefiting from the strength of the Austin economy. We also have one of the lowest tax rates. Again, with this larger tax base, we actually also have one of the lower tax rates in the state of Texas. And so property taxes are now become very important to our budget. What that means, though, when times are good, that's great. And it looks like things will continue to be good in Austin for a while. They've slowed down a bit right now, but they're still very healthy and strong. We do want to be thoughtful about this, though. Say it another way, we are highly leveraged now to property tax revenues. If there ever was a day where Austin's economy significantly slowed down or even started to dip, it would have a very fundamental shift on our current financial model. So if there's anything we talk a lot about enrollments in the college because that's what we do and that's what we're about. As the budget officer, I'm paying attention to what's going on with the local economy and market values, right? But the good news is it continues to be good news. Tuition and fees. So we all know what it is. We have them here at tuition and fees. There's a few things that are interesting about ACC's tuition and fees. So first of all, we haven't increased in-district tuition now in 11 years. That's pretty much unprecedented in the state of Texas. Again, strength of property taxes, big impact on that. We've actually lowered our out-of-district fee and our out-of-state tuition over the last 5 years. So tuition and fees at one point was over a third of our operating budget. And as we saw on the slide a while ago, it's down to 14%. It continues to be a declining source of revenue for us. We also, even with that number, with things like dual credit and other programs, at any point in time, about 20 to 25% of our tuition and fees are actually waived. They're not actually billed to the student. They'll still show up as a revenue line. There's another line that offsets it. But even with that amount, there's already been a lot of decisions made over many years where a lot of our students actually don't have to feel the brunt of the actual stated tuition and fee rate. state appropriation. So we heard a lot about this last year, right? So brand new funding model. For many decades prior to last year, we had generally worked off the same funding model in the state of Texas, which was contact hour based. You don't know what a contact hour is? It is the actual hours in instruction, right? So credit hours is kind of hours per week, generally speaking. Contact hour is actually the actual time in class. And so that's how we've generally been funded, which means it's generally been enrollment based. We were basically getting funded on how many students we had in the classroom for some amount of time. That's how it's been for a very long time. As such, we tended to be more focused on the actual enrollment number. Are enrollments growing? Are they growing? Because if the enrollments are growing, we have more contact hours, it means we'll get money from the state. Throw all that out the window. So in the last legislative cycle last year, the state adopted House Bill 8. So you'll hear House Bill 8 or HB 8, you'll hear that term a lot. And it was a brand new funding model for the state of Texas Community College. It is now entirely outcomes based. So it was all input, right? Students coming in the door. Now it is all about credentials of value. That's the magic word. So the state has actually identified or defined of our associate's degrees and certificates and skills awards and everything we do, that we kind of issue a piece of paper to a student to say you accomplished something. The state has now defined those and put criteria around it to come up with those that are a credential of value. Jenna, by the way, Dr. Jenna Cullinay-Hagee, she's actually our kind of internal expert on this at this point. So I'm just going to hit on it real briefly. But the credential of value is really all based off of that you have documented evidence, and this is really the state because they're the ones that's kind of certifying this, that a student 10 years down the road, their earnings, there's actually a positive ROI on their future income, taking into account the cost of their education, than what they would have if they did not have a post-secondary credential. So that is the measuring stick that the coordinating board is using to determine whether our degrees and certificates and so forth are credentials of value. Did it truly increase the earnings of our students measured over a 10-year period? The good news is all of our degrees and certificates actually met that threshold. So it's not like we had to go back and throw a bunch of our degrees out the door or say they won't be funded anymore. So we're good. But it is this very fundamental shift in how we think about kind of what matters from a budget standpoint for our student enrollments. There's going to be a whole lot more about this. It's also kind of fueling some of that 70 by 30 goal. There's this recognition if we increase our completions, we now would be directly benefit from increased funding for doing that. So it is designed or intended to be an incentive-based program. If your students do better, you will get more money. And then hopefully you use that money to go make the students do even better and so on. And so this is something we're still, I'll say community colleges in general, we're still trying to figure out what all this means. There's almost not a week that goes by where I end up in a conversation and something pops up and says, oh yeah, that's going to be different now. Continuing education, this is kind of a game changer for continuing education. In a very good way, ultimately, is the credentials of values don't distinguish between credit and non-credit. It is just saying that it is a credential of value. The state is saying we don't care whether you called it credit or non-credit. This creates incredible opportunity for CE to tap into basically a new funding source. Now it means we have to align CE around meeting the definitions of credentials of value, but if we can do that, we can get significant funding for CE programs that used to we couldn't have gotten in the old model. It's just things like this. I use that as an example of where kind of the world has changed a little bit on state funding. But I think many of us think that it's generally, even though there's going to be some kind of short-term pains of kind of figuring this out, the opportunity that it provides is actually a win for community colleges. And with that, to kind of incentivize right out of the gate, the state increased community college funding by 20%. in total as part of putting this new program in. So we took that as hopefully evidence and commitment from the state that they are actually going to do their part. And if we do better, we will actually get more money. Now, of course, state legislature, and they meet every 2 years, and we'll see what they do. But at least we're off to a good start, and the fact that they actually threw more money in the pot was a very positive sign, and of course, much appreciated. I'm going to go through real quick. Those are the three big buckets: property taxes, tuition and fees, state appropriations. You may have noticed on the pie chart that there was a 3.9% number that said other. This is things like investment income, auxiliary enterprises, so that could be vending or food services or the golf course. So there is some additional revenue in there. It's a small percentage, but it is more money. The biggest chunk of that is just our interest income, investment income. I won't spend a lot of time on it. I will tell you there's nothing exciting here. We're highly restricted on how we can invest public dollars. It's basically, we have to put it in things like certificates of deposits and U.S. treasuries. We don't get to be in the stock market. We don't get to do anything cool. It's really, really boring. But especially when interest rates are higher right now, even though we as individuals probably don't like that very much, for the college, it's actually beneficial because that's where those are the interest rates are what drives actually our investment income more times than not. What about grants? It wasn't even on the pie chart, and so grants are important. Most of our grants, the lion's share of the dollars of our grants go into student financial aid. That's important to remember. So the college doesn't, from an operation standpoint, doesn't directly benefit from that. But we do get other grants, right, that are funding certain aspects of college operations. The really important thing that I always say about grants, though, is they come with strings attached, so we always have to know that, right? There's a contract with it. It's very prescriptive on how we can use those funds, and they generally have a finite lifetime. It is a 1-year grant, a 3-year grant, 5-year grant. So we always want to be very thoughtful about using those grants and then making financial commitments that will be beyond the life of the grant. But they can be really good for pilot programs, for doing something that we've never tried before, right? Or some other type of short-term investment. We just want to be careful, right, that we're not relying on that grant to balance the budget. And that's why you actually don't see grants in our operating budget. We actually account for them separately than our operating budget because we don't want to get excited because we got a new grant and think that we can go give everybody pay raises, right? All right, where does the money go? We're a service organization. No surprise, the vast majority of our money goes to salaries and benefits. So we're sitting right now at about 63%. It's been pretty steady, I would say, over the last 10 years or so, in that kind of mid 60% range. That's actually a really good spot to be for a community college. You'll see at some colleges that run much tighter budgets that this number will get in the 80% plus. That's actually a red flag. I know it sounds good at first. It's like, well, we're paying everybody more. Well, not necessarily. It just means I have less revenue to pay. But it also means I don't have a lot of wiggle room in my budget. And if I ever have to tighten the belt, I have to start talking about salaries and benefits. And so we don't want to do that. So you do want to make sure that this number doesn't get too high as a percentage of your budget, because the only thing you can do later is reduce those if you have to reduce your budget. So we're in a good spot, and we've been really stable with that number for a while. You'll see debt service on here. Fancy name, debt service. These are our debt payments. And so for a lot of our buildings, not so much for equipment anymore, it's generally for buildings, we finance those. So it's no different than a mortgage payment, or a car loan for ACC. So this is those annual payments towards our debt. Now, a good amount of our debt, and more so lately, is actually paid directly by the taxpayers through taxes. So this is the GO obligation bond that we go out and we have an election. So about half of that amount that you're seeing there is actually not having to come out of the rest of the operating, it's not coming out of tuition and fees. There's actually a special tax levy, right, where the taxpayers are paying that. And then you have operating costs. This is all of our operating budgets. So this is your supplies, your travel. We've also got utilities and so forth. Makes up about 16% of our budget. And then we have basically the maintenance, kind of reinvestment, any of our capital outlay, whether that be equipment or facilities, is just shy of 5% of our budget. Let's skip that one. So compensation, this is one of those, right? We could talk forever on compensation, so we're not going to do that. But what's really important for compensation is to go back to board policy, right? The way that ACC and the decisions that are made in the annual budget process for compensation is pretty much entirely being driven by the language that is in the board's compensation policy, which, by the way, is policy DEA. And it talks about who's our comparable market. Where should we fit in that market? For faculty, it's very prescriptive. It actually says full-time faculty are compared to the 8 metro community colleges and actually lists them by name. So this is Alamo and Dallas and Houston. And it says, and they will be ranked in the top 3 at each of these. So the administration basically has zero discretion on how we are compensating full-time faculty. It is explicitly spelled out in board policy. Adjunct faculty is a percentage of that. It actually says in board policy, and adjunct faculty will get 68.75% of the full-time faculty. So again, the annual budget process just becomes a calculation of what the policy is already saying to do. There's not really any decisions being made at that point in the budget process. It just is what it is based off of policy. Staff gets a little less specific. It has more value statements. It talks about that we will have market competitive salaries. It talks about that market should be compared to the local market. Because as you can imagine with staff, there's only one faculty job description for all 700 full-time faculty. There's 700 job descriptions for right now, just over 2,000 full-time staff in the college. So the policy can't be as detailed or specific about how each member of staff will be paid. So it speaks more generally. That, we're going to go do market studies and we're going to compare ourselves to these markets, and here's generally our goal. But it's general, market competitive. Well, what does that mean? And so there is a lot more process that comes behind the scenes for determining what is the right number for staff salaries. We do market studies every 2 years by policy for staff. And then we're about to kick off, which we've been averaging lately, almost right at it every 9 years, but let's just say 8 to 10 years. And we're going to start one this summer of actually doing a comprehensive classification and compensation study. So instead of just doing a market check, this would actually review all of our policies, structure, system, which we'll see what comes out of that process. It's going to kick off this summer. It will also include a market study, but it's more holistic in terms of looking at that. On the annual raise, as part of that, I get lots of questions, understandably so. Well, usually it's just how much is it going to be? That's the common question. But I do have other people that want to know, and how do we get to that? How does that work? Really what it is, there's all this data out there, and we use some of it. There's CPIs and PCIs and all this stuff. ECI, Employee Cost Index, there's a bunch of them. And we will look at all of those. But what we're trying to do is, again, the board policy has set this goal that you will be market competitive. So ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish with our annual raise is what do we think the market is going to move in terms of wages next year? And therefore, what does ACC need to do to try to stay in front of that? To maintain. So if we feel that we're at market average right now, let's just say, Well, then what do we need to do next year to stay at market average? And so we use all that data to try to, really we're just trying to project what do we think the average raise will be for Austin, if you really think of it that simply. And that's what we're trying to get to. The problem that we've seen the last especially 3 years, there's this understanding that the market over time takes into account things like cost of living and inflation. So if you're meeting or beating the market, you're also then doing what you need to do to stay up with these other things that really is what matters to us as individuals when we're balancing our checkbook. The issue is the last 3 years, as we all know, the market just throw all the rules out the door, right? So we're seeing inflation shooting through the roof. We're seeing at first wages going down, then wages start going up, and it's been really hard, I'll just say, to really feel really confident how you're hitting that number, because what's happened is, this is absolutely a true statement, and I'll be happy, someone may say, show me the evidence. ACC gave the most generous, the last 2 years, ACC, it's actually true, has given the most generous raise of any community college, for sure, and we basically beat every governmental entity in Central Texas for the last 2 years. It's also true to say, yeah, but why do I feel like you didn't stay up with the inflation and therefore the cost of living? Historically, those you couldn't have had both be true. We would have been able to say that other statement with confidence and also know that we beat inflation with confidence. I can't tell you that here today. And guess what? It's different for each one of us. If you were renting 2 years ago, hey, there's nothing nice you can say about it. If you owned a home 2 years ago, your price didn't go up. My mortgage didn't go up just because the cost of inflation went up. And so it's just difficult when the market's moving like that, because it's impacting all of us differently. The data is fluctuating every month, and it's just hard to nail it down. So what we did is we felt that we were doing the best we could by at least making sure we were doing as good or better than anybody else, recognizing that even with that said, it may not have been enough. But also recognizing that it's really hard to find data to actually answer that question head on. But I want you to know what the intent is. The intent, again, is that we are trying to figure out what the annual raise is for us to maintain or improve our position in our defined market, which is defined in board policy. That's what we're trying to do. And so we're going to go out and survey. In fact, we'll be kicking this off actually in the coming days. We're going to go find out what are the ISDs doing, what's UT Austin doing, what's the state of Texas doing, what's the city of Austin doing. We're going to go get as much data as we can and figure out how do we meet or beat kind of everybody else in our market. I almost said the word compression, and then I just said it by saying I almost said it. We know this is a big topic. I'm just going to say it out loud before anybody beats me to it. Compression means a lot of things. There are lots of forms of compression, and I will just tell you right now, ACC has every one of them. But this is largely why we're bringing in this consultant, is to have them come in and do a really deep analysis on our structures and our policies to see what we can do to improve compression. I will be honest, there are some types of compression that we have that there's not going to be a universal agreement that they are wrong, that the compression is wrong. But there will be other ones, though, where it's kind of been self-inflicted and we did it and we're going to have to accept that we need to do something different. But the compression that's caused by the board wanting to take a leadership position in the minimum wage, which I think as a concept we'd probably all applaud, but the reality is that's created compression, because at the same time they were 2 years ago approving what was almost a 30% increase in the minimum wage. They were at the same time having conversations about how to limit the raises that the higher end of the structure was getting. And their initial starting point was that we wanted to limit raises for anybody that made more than $100,000 at the college. You may all have your thoughts, but by definition, that creates compression. We're giving a 30% raise to the low end. We're going to limit the raise on the high end. We compressed it, right? And so I just share that as examples of compression, but also things that are going to be interesting conversations in the upcoming year as we work with the consultant, where it's, it was clear, from the board that that's what they wanted to happen. Now, again, that doesn't mean we have to like it or agree with it. I just need to make sure we know where those decisions are coming from and what the implications of them are, right? So I'm sure we'll be more about compensation. I'm trying to make sure I leave. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit because I know y'all have questions. I'm not going to talk a lot about benefits in retirement. Y'all know we have them. We're TRS for pension, great pension program, one of the most stable in the country. We get the benefits of both worlds. For health insurance, we're considered actually state employees, which we usually aren't, but in this case we are, but we want to be because we get to participate in ERS. I know there's always concerns about exactly what they cover and how they do it, but the fact of the matter is you can't beat the deal for the price that we get out of employee retirement system. So it's very beneficial that we get to participate in those programs at the community college. I already talked a little about other expenses. This is just utilities, insurance, travel, supplies. Cash reserves. There's lots of conversations at the board for those of you that have nothing better to do and you actually pay attention to the board meetings. Last year, the board actually spent quite a bit of time talking about cash reserves. The college's reserves have been increasing. We've actually done quite well the last 2 years for a variety of reasons, which I presented to the board, all of those reasons in a couple of different meetings. But for those of you that want to make sure the college is healthy and sustainable, know that the college is doing quite well. We do not have excess reserves. In fact, our reserve levels are among the lowest of our peer group, but we do that on purpose because we actually don't like the idea that we just have a bunch of money sitting in the bank and it's not doing anything. But we do want to make sure that we're healthy, right, and that we have contingency, and if things got tight, we can just tighten our belt for a month and not have to have more draconian actions. So I think you can feel comfortable that the college is in a really good financial position. We're not going to talk about procurement in this meeting, but there's a big thing going on, and I'm not going to get into debt financing options. So there, I ripped through that in 30 minutes. So where's Jessica? I'm ready for questions, I think.
Okay. If you have a question and you're in the room, you can raise your hand. We did have one question come through on the live chat, which Sydney is monitoring over there. So going once, twice, and of course you can ask a question in a minute, but I'm going to go to the live stream question. Thank you for messaging that to me, Sydney. The question is, does market study look at cost of living?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And again, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation with this consultant. So it doesn't directly look at cost of living, the market study. So as I was trying to mention a while ago, it's just compared to the market, right? Are we market competitive? What we've seen the last couple of years is this little bit of disconnect, and in some cases not little, between what the market is paying and what the actual cost of living is, right? And it's just, so we're not directly trying to define cost of living. In fact, there's not really good resources, by the way, to do this. Instead, we're relying on the fact that at some point, at least over time, the market will reflect the cost of living. And this generally is true. In Austin, the average income in Austin is higher than it is in just about anywhere else in the nation, right? I think we're in the top 3 usually. Now, these are averages. No, I'm saying this. I get it. It's averages. But that is a true statement. And that is also a reflection of the fact that generally Austin has a higher cost of living. So the thinking is if we can make sure that we're being market competitive, the market has taken into account cost of living, except in things like during COVID, where things all of a sudden that are supposed to work a certain way just don't. And so the last 2 years have been different and in so many ways kind of unprecedented, or at least in what I call the modern era, which is the turn of the century. So yeah. But this, I think, will be a good policy conversation with the consultant. Are there other things and other factors we can look at to make sure that we're kind of getting to the values that we want to in our compensation philosophy?
What is the name of the consultant that ACC is using? And a second part of that is, how is such a major decision made as to who puts that much influence into financial decisions for the colleges and how they were selected?
So the name, which I'm glad I just had a conversation this morning about them, or otherwise I would have never remembered their name. The firm is Guidehouse, which is the one that the board approved. They're not here yet. We're still kind of negotiating a contract with them. But that is the approved vendor, Guidehouse. To your question about the process, we actually formed a compensation committee that has representatives from the employee associations to be on that procurement process. So we issued an RFP, got the submittals, and then that committee was the one both that helped write the RFP to make sure we were going to hit all the topics that the college was interested in, but then they were also the ones that would have done the score sheets and the evaluations that led to Guidehouse being identified as the most qualified vendor that came through. We're going to keep on. Russell actually just announced this to the employee associations a week ago. He agreed that we will keep that committee in place throughout the consulting engagement. So we will continue, the administration and the consultant will continue to work through and with that committee to kind of ensure transparency and understanding, and hopefully they can help disseminate information to their associations and so forth.
Okay, I don't see another question. Oh, I've got one here. Hold on.
So it's impossible.
Something that earlier you were talking about the number of job descriptions, and that there were like full-time faculty, 700 full-time faculty, one job description versus 700 other job descriptions in the staff, right?
Yep.
I'm kind of curious how you think about the full-time faculty, as a monolith, because I'm sure that you know that there are definitely some positions that are much harder to fill because of market competition, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was kind of curious if ACC is considering or should consider changing that approach of the one title fits all or one scale fits all.
Yeah, so thanks, Samantha. So as it sits, I'll just kind of say your question another way. And we have, like I said, one job description, we have one salary grid. All faculty, regardless of discipline, are placed and therefore paid equivalently the same. And I think what you're getting at in your question is to what degree are we looking at, there may be other elements of this, but the one that comes to mind is like different pay by discipline, right? So if we have hard to fill something in the health sciences, right, and it's like, or biology, or, we just can't get them, would we ever look at, are we looking at, I don't know if we'd ever look at it. Are we currently looking at having like a different pay scale? You can do this in so many different ways if you ever go to do it. To answer your question, I have not had that conversation in many years. No one's brought it up to me, so I'm not aware. I'm definitely not working on anything. HR is not working on anything. We don't have, even though they'll be here and they'd be happy to engage on anything we'll pay them for, we actually don't have faculty pay as kind of an intended scope of work for this consultant. But I have no doubt that, me and Kelly would be more than happy to see if they'd be willing to go and tackle some specific topics around faculty pay. But at this point, to answer your question, it hasn't bubbled up to me, and I haven't had that conversation in a long time. The few times that it has come up, it was very short-lived conversations. And basically, the status quo very quickly became the status quo. And this is so true on so many things in compensation. I almost feel the need to say it, so I'm going to. There's not a right and wrong, and there is no universal opinion on how certain aspects of compensation should be in any institution, and definitely not at ACC. So what's interesting, for every time we have some group that comes forward, I'm just going to pick on that, but this is completely hypothetical, but I'm just going to use that scenario. Let's say we had some number of faculty that are saying, hey, we really need to look at this, and we're not being competitive, we need to do it. The reality is you'll have just as many or more that are scared to death of you going down that path, because we immediately go to this winners and losers mentality. And well, if biology or nursing is going to get that, then somehow the college has now made this decision about a value that we then internalize real quick and say, well, you decided that they were worth more, and then we don't mean just worth in terms of dollars. We then take that to something more than that. And we do it in the staff side all the time. I've been meeting on compensation for 15 years, and it's without doubt, someone will make this really great case, someone will say yes, 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 and then they'll turn right around, and not 5 minutes later, someone else is making the exact opposite conflicting argument about why we should do it that way within the same groups, right? And so these are always a challenge. We're going to be experiencing it over the next kind of 6 to 12 months with this group. It's one of the things that worries me the most about this process is going to be dealing with basically the internal dynamics that it will actually kind of stoke those fires a little bit. It's going to bring things to light, and there's going to be a lot of different opinions about it. And the people that have been here for a long time, we want to maintain anything that talks about longevity. I've been here for 27 years. Let's not do anything that diminishes my longevity. The person that just got here, I want to talk about career projection. I want to talk about, how can I advance? I want to talk about why is the person that's been here for 20 years making more money than me when I think I'm running circles around them. This is actually the conversations that we get to have, me and Kelly. Y'all can be empathetic towards us. But we're going to have them again as part of this process.
So you talked about compression, and I just want to understand, I'm not a finance major or an econ major. So to me, when I hear the bottom people are getting 30% raises and the top people are getting a cap, that just sounds good to me. What's the negative result of compression that we need to understand when asking for these sorts of things?
Yeah, so gosh, now we're going to start getting into capitalism and socialism, and the as I said a while ago, there's not a right or wrong. So I don't want it to be that way. Because it's not. There are different philosophies on it, and it's not wrong to say, that I think that those that are making less should make more, and I'm worried that some people are making too much. But to answer your question, which is the right question, why are we now getting a lot of concern about it? Why are people saying that we have issues with it? Is the flip side of that is I feel that now my value, it's what I was talking about a while ago, is somehow been diminished, because now the new employee that is right out of college, has no work experience, comes in at $45,000 a year. That is our minimum current salary. The employee with 5 years of experience, but they're in a job that, let's say in the market, back up a little bit. Let's say the market only pays these jobs $40,000 a year, but we've said we're going to pay them $45,000. What's happened is because the college has not yet made a decision that if we're going to overpay, I'm just being very technical here, compared to the market said it's 40, we've chosen to pay 45. Well, we're going to pay everybody 10% over market, but that's not been the answer. The answer has been, we're going to take care of those at the lower end, and the problem that you get from those that are somewhere in the middle is, but I have a bachelor's degree and they don't. I've been here for 10 years and they haven't. And you're basically devaluing. This is the feeling. I'm not advocating. This is, to your point, I feel like you have now devalued my worth relative to that other person because you've decided to pay us the same or closer to the same than we otherwise would. It's a completely relative conversation. It's relative to what I was making compared to them, and it's relative to how I view my value compared to them. And this is what makes it very difficult. So what's happened is there's actually nothing wrong from a policy standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint of what we're currently doing. But there is a significant percentage of our employees right now that have concerns about that because of how they feel it's impacting their value. So why did they get 30% and I didn't? And why yesterday was my role worth $10,000 more a year than them, and today my role is only worth $5,000 more a year. This is the feelings, right, that lead to these responses. And that's why I'm actually made the comment, we're going to get into this, and some of this, the answer that's going to come out on the other end on some of these is going to be, yes, you're right, and yes, we meant it, and no, we're not changing it because we actually meant it, that we wanted the lower end to make more, and we were worried that the high end was making too much. And some of those are going to have to go to the board for the board to reiterate that from a policy standpoint. There are going to be some other things, by the way, just real quick, in compression that we've talked about, though, which is a different thing. And it's where we have set up org structures, and by creating 700 different job profiles for 2,000 employees instead of, let's say, something that would probably look more normal for an institution like us, which would be more about half that. When you do that and then you're trying to slot those extra titles into that same range, you're going to compress, right? So if I decide that I want someone now to be a senior accountant instead of just an accountant, I have compressed them now with the accounting manager. So the only way to fix that is I would have to go give the accounting manager more money. But if I don't, the senior accountant, I slotted them in between an accountant and accountant manager. I added a new position in there. Everybody is now more compressed. There's a lot of feedback we're getting right now about that type of compression where there's like managers that say, I'm the manager and I barely make any more money than my employees. Some of that's being caused by the living wage because their employees got a big raise. Some of it is caused because we have added a bunch of layers of positions, and they're not going to give me more money so that the accounting office can have more levels of accountants. So to have those levels, you just have to squeeze them in the existing ranges, and it compresses everybody. We have a lot of that going on, and that's why I said there's actually some other types, but I won't get into them. We're going to have the consultant try to dive through all of those. Some of those are things where we'll have to just own it, and we probably do need to fix it. Some of them are more kind of philosophical, and it'll be an interesting conversation to see where we land on those. Great question, though. Thank you.
We have about 10 minutes left. I have a few questions from online that I'll get to now. One of those is, how long will the compensation study take?
Yeah, actually, I was just looking at their submittal. I've been saying, and I'll say we, but normally when you have big consulting engagements, the standard is 12 to 18 months. Doesn't matter what it is. Build a house, do a compensation study, it's 12 to 18 months. And I would think that that's probably okay. I did look at it. I think it's a little aggressive, but hey, we'll start with aggressive. They actually proposed about a 6-month timeline to get through their work. I think they're being a little bit optimistic about to what degree ACC will be able to meet that timeline with them. Usually they can go faster than we can go. So I think that's theoretical. So they've said 6 months. I would think we're probably looking at something like 12 months. What we would really like to have is for anything that's kind of financial related, that we can get that in about 12 months, which puts us just in time for the FY26 budget cycle so that we could put any of those recommendations that have a budget impact, including an updated market study, which we would be scheduled to do next spring anyways. If they can get their timeline with that, then that would be really good. If they have other types of policy things, or at some point we'll want them to help us put procedures and systems in place to maintain any new structure, it'd be okay, right, if that happens outside the budget process. But I'm really hopeful that we're looking at about 12 months.
Thank you. The last questions we'll get to online. We have another one in person, so I want to make sure we have time to get to that. talks about support for employees and asks, what is ACC doing to support employees, and can we get some sort of benefits when it comes to hourly or part-time employees?
So this is probably deviating a little bit from just a budget piece. I'll speak just very generally, and then I probably need some more specifics to have a better answer. I think what I'm going to take away is just hourly employees out of this, because when we say just other types of part-time employees, so part-time staffing table, so part-time Prof Tech classified, they're getting the same benefits as any other Prof Tech classified. Just in certain cases, they get prorated based off their FTE. So I think that answer is really more around what we refer to as hourly employees. I'm gonna be real honest, because I think it's important. And actually, I just had this conversation at Northridge with a hourly employee that has been here for 17 years. Keep in mind, all of our policies around hourlies use the word temporary, but we recognize that we have hourly employees that have been here for a very long time. By definition, the definition of an hourly employee at ACC is someone that works half-time or less and therefore is not benefits eligible. The whole existence for that classification is to have a non-benefits eligible contingent workforce. Now, I'm saying that to be honest. I'm not saying it to advocate for it or to say that how we're doing it or using that group is correct. But it's important when we ask that question that we understand that is the intention behind having that classification. And so when we ask questions like, well, how can we get hourly employees to have benefits? By definition, they wouldn't be hourly employees anymore if we gave benefits. So the question, now with that said, there are some things that we are looking at. I just had a meeting this week with Andy Kim, our wonderful sustainability guy. If y'all haven't met him, he's a rock star. And we went back over all of the things around the bus pass program and we're going to come back with some recommendations, and we think there's some stuff we can do on how we can do where hourly employees can also get the bus pass. Now, we are going to have to sort through. A lot of our hourly employees truly are temporary, like they're literally here for a month or two. But sort through the difference between that and our hourly employees that really look like regular employees. They're here semester after semester, year after year. So we're going to work on that. So there are some things like that I think we can do for hourly employees. But when we start talking about other types of benefits, what we really need to be talking about, and I really want to have this conversation in the near future with the rest of kind of leadership, is how are we actually, what is our actual staffing strategies? It has always been the college's intent that we primarily rely on full-time benefited staff. That is absolutely true. So then when I go and I run and look at the pay register and see that we have at any point in time 1,500 hourly employees, it's hard to reconcile that true. And I'm just saying it out loud. And so, yes, I would really like to understand how we're using a lot of our hourly employees. And it's not how do we get them benefits. It's should we actually be structuring that differently so they actually would be in a benefits eligible job. So the nice lady that I was meeting with at Northridge, my advice to her is, you've been here for 17 years. It sounds like you're working pretty much a max hourly load. The conversation with your management team is can I be in a 75% Prof Tech position? And therefore I would get benefits. I'm willing to work more. I've been here for 17 years. Why are you still limiting my hours? Because in some cases, there's not enough work to do. I happen to know in this position, in this department they were in, they have like 30 or 40 hourlies. So why do we have 30 or 40 hourlies instead of, let's say, 20 full-time positions? These are really legitimate questions, and I actually look forward to maybe being able to find some time to help dig into that.
Question over here.
This will be our last question.
Hi. So I know that as an institution, we are moving towards free tuition. I was wondering if the new HB8 funding model was going to sort of cover that gap. And if it doesn't, then what will cover that gap in our budget?
Yeah. Wow, we got all the way to the end before someone, I think free tuition was the catalyst for having this conversation. So thank you for that. So the answer is yes, HB8 is going to help, but it's also true if you've followed along in my financial forecast, it doesn't cover all of what's right now the projected cost of free tuition. And so we did get, we got $6.8 million in new funding for kind of the old regular formula funding. We also got a little bit more money now for a special appropriation for dual credit. So in total, we're getting about $8 million in net new dollars to the budget that came out of different elements of HB8. That will cover the free tuition for this upcoming year. As we grow that program, though, the board already approved a 5-year program. And so each year as we add a cohort, that cost will go up each year. It's possible that we will get more HB8 funding if we, in fact, are more successful, but we don't know that yet and therefore can't depend on it. So how are we going to fund this going forward in future years? It's back to, it's the strength of the current operating budget, including our property tax revenues, which have allowed us for the last 11 years to not raise tuition. What we're basically saying is we actually could do even better than that, and we could have been talking about actually lowering tuition. And so that is the plan, is yes, HB8, but it's also prioritizing, not taking existing dollars. It's talking about how do we prioritize new tax dollars that we project to get over the coming years, and just know going in that right off the top, one of those priorities is basically to buy down our tuition costs for our students. In other words, we could do a lot of things with those dollars, and we have conversations every year about how we will use those dollars. This is just now a decision that's been made kind of at the board level to say right off the top, we want you to expand this program when you make your annual budget decisions. And we've presented to the board how we can conservatively project that we will have enough new revenues each year to do all the things we're currently doing, all the things we would otherwise be expecting to spend money on in any normal year, and we still had enough money to also do this program. And I want to make sure that we're clear on that. There were no changes. You can go back and pull my last year's 10-year forecast, and I have made no changes in assumptions about how much we're expanding enrollments and therefore adding faculty positions, how much our long-term compensation projections are, the fact that we have a bond program and that we're going to expand campuses and there'll be new operating costs to doing that. All of that was in there last year. None of those numbers have changed. It just simply showed that based off of updated revenue projections, we have enough money to also do this other thing.
Okay, that gets us to time. It's now 1:30. So thank you for joining us for the campus conversation, understanding the budget process. We will be putting together a recap for you, posting it on the Fact Staff Info Hub. So if any of those questions that came in through our live stream did not get responded to today, we will be working with Neil and any other area to get those answers for you, and we'll include those answers in the recap. Again, thank you very much. Thank you, Neil, and have a happy rest of your day.